need someone to talk to and you don't know what to do, call us 214-4400 when you're feeling all alone and they turn their back on you. Call us 214-4400. Call us 214-4400. Call us 214-4400. Call us.
You're listening to the Kind Counseling Podcast. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Now back to the show. Welcome to the Kind Counseling Podcast. It's your host, Dania Roberts. I'm here today with my brother, Al. What's going on, sir?
What's up, bro? It's 87 degrees. It's almost riding weather. Time to go. Get on these roads and get these bikes out.
I hear you, man. I hear you. Today we have a special guest. We got a brother from way back, brother Frank Galimidi. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself, man. What you been up to all these years?
Sure. So again, my name is Frank Galimidi, from Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah,
In Florida, in Palm Beach County, for about the last 17 years. Cami and I know each other from way back. We worked at a program called Bridge Back to Life in Coney Island for years together, before I moved down here. I've been working in the substance use disorder and mental health field for the last almost 23 years, since I'm about 22 years old. First, again, in New York for about 6 years, and then the last 17 years down here. Currently, I serve as the CEO of Sunview Wellness in Palm Beach County, Florida, which is an outpatient local program for the local residents of Palm Beach County. Again, working with clients that primarily deal with substance use disorder and mental health disorders. And, one of the things that's interesting is that I've been doing this for so long, and yet the incidence of the amount of people that we need to treat continues to go up. And because of that, and because of all the things that I've seen in the last 20 some odd years, I really kind of start to speak out a lot about, in the community about really, obviously the dangers of substance use, but really what's going on beneath the surface and why we're starting to see so much of mental health disorder and substance use going on, out in our communities.
All right. So Frank, just before we jump into some of the issues that you're dealing with, what is an outpatient program just for the audience, and what does
Sure.
that like? What does that look like? What do you guys cater to?
Absolutely. So I think when people think about somebody going to rehab for
Right.
substance use disorder, they think of that old classic 28-day model where somebody goes into a treatment facility that almost maybe looks like a hospital, especially up north, New York or New Jersey, it kind of looks like a hospital. Down here, it looks a little bit different. But where somebody actually, sleeps overnight and stays there for 28 days and does all their meals there and basically does groups all day and things like that. So in an outpatient program, we have a couple of different levels of care, and that is based on amount of hours that somebody will be at a center. But in an outpatient program, so people go home every day and they go back to their environments, and it's a critically important component from my perspective of treatment because people need to learn how to stay sober and stay healthy in their real world. When you go into inpatient rehab, which is necessary for a lot of people, you basically get a lot of the stresses that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. They get removed for a period of time where you really get to just kind of focus on yourself, which for the people that have the ability to do that can be a really awesome thing. But that's finite. It ends. Eventually you go back to your wife, your kids, your spouse, your job, your bills, your all these kinds of things. And being quite honest, that's where a lot of people get tripped up is, well, how do I balance trying to stay healthy with dealing with my day-to-day world and my day-to-day life? So in an outpatient program, people come in every day, or I also have evening programming here. Maybe people come in after work, and they kind of get to process what's going on with them from day to day and try to learn how to stay healthy in spite of things that are out of their control happening. Arguments with their boss, a fight with their wife, financial issues, all the things that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. And we deal with everything from, people that struggle with alcoholism to people that struggle with using fentanyl, to people that are bipolar, to people that have schizoaffective disorder, and a combination of all those kinds of things.
Okay. All right. Al, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess my biggest question is which one do you think is more productive? I've actually been to an outreach program back in my youth, and I thought it was ineffective because I would leave the outreach program and then I would just go home and just get intoxicated and try to sober up in time to come back.
So
Which one
I
do you
take a
think is
look
more
at
effective?
treatment, absolutely. So we take a look at treatment as a continuum, and this is kind of in particular how we really do it down in South Florida. As long as people have the resources to do it. We start at the highest level of care, which is detox, and we kind of work our way down into like a residential treatment. So maybe by the time you step down into like these outpatient levels of care that we talk about, they're called partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient, and outpatient. Partial hospitalization is what they used to call in New York day treatment, where basically people go
Okay.
all day, but they still sleep at home. People, you
Right.
can typically step into an outpatient program, hopefully after being able to, if you're still able to going into residential treatment. So maybe you're stepping into outpatient after maybe getting sober for 35 days or something like that between detox and residential treatment. So you start to have the foundation, laid down before you kind of step into a program where, I only have 2 days sober and I'm trying to white knuckle it and going back home after a program. And the guy on the corner is going to hand me a blunt, or there's alcohol in my refrigerator because the people that I live with are still drinking. So I could definitely understand that. It's not for everybody to step right into outpatient. There are some people that are able to, but they also, a lot of times, maybe have had previous treatment experience. They're already trying to go to community-based supports like AA or NA. So they have supports around them. But if you're trying to step into outpatient treatment for the first time and you have no basis of what recovery looks like, you just drank yesterday and then you're walking into an outpatient program, the
Right.
likelihood is it's not going to work. You probably won't
Mm.
meet criteria for it anyway. We would recommend at that point that you need to go to a higher level of care to go get stabilized.
All right.
Now, for those, are those like, I guess, are those like court ordered programs or are they like, people are bringing themselves to these programs?
So it's interesting. Obviously there's a mix, right? When I worked in New York, a lot of the people that we worked with were court mandated. And I know Cami can speak to that. A lot of them were there for some kind of treatment court because they've gotten in trouble or they caught a DUI. One of the things that I see a lot where I am down in South Florida is there is a lot of people that have intrinsic motivation, internal motivation to get healthy. Things have happened. They realize that they're getting unwell. Obviously, they're starting to have some issues with their family members, financial issues, and all these kinds of things. So we get pretty fortunate here. A lot of the clients, I would probably say our population here is 80%, self-referred. Or a family
Oh,
member
okay.
makes a suggestion to them, and maybe 20%, somebody gets referred by a probation officer or a court or something like that. But the majority of the people that we get here, they're self-referred to us.
Okay. Just going back for a second, right? Just like you said, you've worked over 25 years in the field. What do you think is the main reason that people become addicted to either drugs or alcohol?
I think that well, my favorite way to take a look at it is I call it for a lot of people unfinished business.
Hmm.
And what do I mean by that? I take a look at addiction as iceberg theory, right? The
Okay.
addiction, the behaviors that go along with that, are the stuff that presents above the surface of the water. The use, the lying, the manipulation, all those kinds of things.
Hmm.
Everything that goes on that's really driving the addiction is everything that's going on underneath, right? The feelings, the emotions. When I take a step back and I take a look at a lot of the clients that I've worked with, over the last 23 years, almost every single one of them has some kind of form of trauma,
Hmm.
whether it
Wow.
be classic
Wow.
big T trauma, the death of somebody that they loved, violence in the household, divorce, or whatever it might be, or something as small as, sitting in class and the teacher told me that I was never going to amount to anything. And it's something that started to ruminate in my head over and over again and started to impact the way I feel about myself. So, so much of addiction really it's a defense mechanism. It's a coping mechanism. The way that we all have, everybody has unhealthy coping mechanisms. Some people
Right.
eat too much. Some people sleep too much. Some people spend too much money. For the clients that I work with and myself in my history, coping mechanism was
Yeah.
to use. And it didn't start out that way. It started out as a social thing. Somebody broke out a joint or somebody broke out a beer. We start drinking. We like the way it makes us feel. But over a period of time, it starts to become more about what the addiction stops us from feeling than the euphoria that goes along with being under the influence. Because how else could somebody continue to do something that creates so much havoc in their life unless it was taking away pain, right? So think about that. I want everybody to think about that, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but from my perspective, addiction isn't a moral issue. It's an issue with unhealthy coping mechanisms, inability to deal with life problems. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that you need better coping skills.
So do you think in this day and age, like people are more sympathetic to the addict as opposed to, because in the 90s, obviously you had the crime bill where they were putting people in jail,
Rockefeller laws, right?
Right, exactly, right. So do you think people are more sympathetic now to like the plight of the addict?
It's interesting. I think in certain ways, yes, because there's more information out there about what's going on. Obviously, we're more publicized now. You see the news reports about the fentanyl coming, from across the border, and the amount of addiction, and all the documentaries we see on Netflix or HBO. But on the opposite end of it, I think in particular in areas where there's large concentrations of treatment, like I live in South Florida, and we call that recovery capital of the world. It has been that way for the last 25 years, where there's more treatment centers per square mile than there is anywhere else in the country. Now, also, California is another big treatment hub, and so is Arizona, and they're kind of moving into all these other states too. But one of the things that happens is that, unfortunately, sometimes the behaviors that go along with early recovery and relapse kind of reinforces negative stigma around what the general public sometimes think an addict is. Oh, they're irresponsible. Oh, they don't take care of themselves. They commit crime and all that kind of stuff. So I think that the more that, unfortunately, that there's relapse around and people struggling or acting out, even though people are more educated about it, I think sometimes the tolerance actually goes down for it. People just want people to, hey, get your stuff together. It kind of, I call it, it's like the parallel process, the same way that family members at a certain point, if somebody continues to try to get sober and relapses, they go from being hopeful and like really encouraging to, as time goes on, if you continue using or you continue relapsing after treatment, family members start to back away and say, hey, you know what, I had enough. So you start to see that in the communities too, where there's a lot of treatment centers around or sober living facilities around, and we have a ton of them around here.
Okay. So all right. So I come from a country, Guyana, right, where that's part of the culture, right? Like people just drink in the morning, the afternoon, and the night, right? I mean, that's just part of the culture,
Sure.
right? And part of socializing, right? So and for some people, they don't see that as an addiction, right? So I guess what I'm wondering is how would you define if somebody's an alcoholic or not, right? Or a drug addict? I mean, like, is there like we know about the DSM or just criteria that you
Of
have,
course,
right?
but the simplest way to take a look at something, and again, I believe that, my job as somebody that works in the field, I'm never going to come out and say, hey, you know what, Cammie, you're an alcoholic. Ultimately that becomes something for you to identify on your own. But one of the simplest ways that I always take a look at it is if you have consequences behind doing something and you do it again, you probably got a problem, right? So, if you do the same thing that's caused you consequences again, it's become something that we have to take a look at. But yeah, if we take a look at it from a classic DSM, perspective, what do we take a look at? The development of tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, psychological preoccupation with the use of substances. Those are some of like the major criteria that we see. When I talk to family members, and I've done preventative educational workshops and stuff like that, hey, how do I know if my kid's got a problem? Well, excessive isolation, secrecy, money disappearing, loss of interest in activities that they used to engage in before, things like that are always really good clear-cut signs that somebody might be struggling with a substance use issue, weight loss, things like that. But for the individual person that's like thinking about it for themselves, you really look at it like this. If you ask yourself the question, I think I might have a problem. I'm not sure if I have a problem. You probably do.
Okay.
You ask yourself, or you're asking yourself, hey, do I have a problem? You do, because obviously there's changes in the way that you behave and the way that you think that are not congruent with the way that you were before, or maybe go against your morals or your values,
Okay.
Well, I guess I have a question about I read earlier this morning, which was interesting, the whole no means no when it comes to substances, where people find themselves where they're trying to get sober and saying, no, I don't want to partake. They become now the enemy and they have to now cut off friends, family
Absolutely.
members because they don't want to partake. Do you see that in your field? And is that something that we need to address, I guess, on a broader scope?
Absolutely, 100%. Boundary setting is like one of the most important things that somebody that's trying to get sober or get into recovery needs to do, right? But it's also one of the most difficult things to do, because not only might it be friends or people from your neighborhood, but it could be people in your own house, right? It could be people, and it definitely could be people that you love and that you have close relationships with. And, I said this on another talk that I gave one time, there's people in my life that it's not even just because of their, substance use history or whatever it might be, but there's people in my life that I legitimately need to learn to love from a distance, because interactions with them are unhealthy for me psychologically, regardless of the idea of thinking about picking up a drink again. Right. But just their interaction just becomes unhealthy for me. And yeah, we see that happen a lot. I work in an area that there is a lot of drugs. I work right outside of Riviera Beach in Palm Beach County, and that's an area that does struggle with a lot of crime and a lot of drugs. And it actually is very, from a certain perspective, kind of reminds me somewhat of Bridge Back to Life, where we worked in Coney Island, and Cammy and I would work with these young guys, and the projects were literally right across the street. We'd be talking to them about staying sober, and then as soon as they'd walk outside, somebody'd go to hand them a blunt. I mean, literally, like right in front of the building. And it's a very uncomfortable situation to get put in, because, people don't want to come across as thinking, oh, people think I'm better than them now, or, I changed, or whatever it might be. And, people don't really give as much credence to the idea that peer pressure does have an impact on people. It most certainly does, in particular with people that don't have the most self-confidence to begin with. So, yeah, it's something that we deal with on a regular basis. I see it in households a lot. Where a husband or wife is trying to get sober, the spouse either does or does not have a problem with using, but the person that I'm working with feels uncomfortable to say to their wife or to their husband, like, hey, I'm trying to get sober. I'd appreciate you not drinking this glass of wine in front of me. Well, because I don't want to cramp their style, where it's my problem, it's not theirs. It takes a lot of work and a lot of courage for somebody to get up, enough guts to say to somebody that they really care about, like, hey, something that your behavior that you're engaging in really is bothering me. So it really comes down to like being able to take down some of that pride and ego that stops us from saying something is hurting us, or asking for help.
Okay. So, so right now, what would you say is the most dangerous drugs that you guys are encountering, like not just in Florida, but just in America as a whole? I guess what would you say?
It varies from state to state, but definitely. But it does, because in certain areas of the country, you see a lot of methamphetamine. We don't see as much of that on the East Coast. You see a lot of that in California, and I worked in the Mid-South. I worked in Memphis, Tennessee for a while, so I was working in all those surrounding, Mississippi and Arkansas and all that stuff. And there was a lot of methamphetamine there, and that's a very, very dangerous drug. But what we hear about on the news, fentanyl. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin. 50 times stronger. Right. Wow. It's so strong that, the paramedics Narcaning people, they have to Narcan them multiple times sometimes to bring them out of an overdose. And, we saw the spike around 2023 of fentanyl overdoses. One of the things that's interesting, though, So something that we're doing must be working is that between 23 and 24, the amount of overdose deaths from fentanyl went down by about 27% to 28%, and then the following year it went down about 21%. We did see it go down. So people,
Okay.
the more now that it's getting talked about a lot, we are starting to see some of those numbers improve. But interestingly enough, it used to be that people were accidentally using fentanyl because they were looking for heroin. One of the things that we've seen now is that fentanyl is people's drug of choice. So they're looking for fentanyl now. It's not like, hey, I got this on accident and I overdosed. It's become certain people, it's a lot of people's drug of choice. That's their primary. They're looking for fentanyl.
You're listening to the Kind Counseling Podcast. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Now back to the show. Wow. So what do you attribute the decrease in like the percentages you just mentioned? Like what do you think led
I
to
think
that?
a lot of that has to do with education. Hopefully some of it, and I couldn't speak to, be 100% sure about it, but hopefully some of the things that they're doing with trying to prevent from some of the drugs from coming over, might have, contribute to it. The amount of treatment that's out there is probably about the same, but there's a lot more education. Think about when we started doing this, for a living, Cami. Like, you really had to go do your research to go find, education and resources about substance use, and all the issues that go along with it. Now it's all over, not only just TV and the news, but social media, YouTube, podcasts. A lot of people working on self-help and all that kind of stuff. So, I hope that some of that's contributing, to what's going on. I get up every day, trying to, just a little bit, make a difference and stop that from happening, but there was a period of time where probably between 2018 and 22, 23, where I personally had to make phone calls to people's parents or spouses that, hey, unfortunately, your son or your husband overdosed and died.
Wow.
And that's one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do in my career.
Wow. Wow. What are some basic things about just about addiction that the public doesn't know?
Well,
Because we work in the field, so we assume that people know
of
stuff.
course. Well, one of the most important things that I always kind of say is that addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're, somebody that has nothing or, the richest person in the country. And I've worked with everything from the very, very indigent to the extremely wealthy. And, the details of what the addiction might look different, but the feelings that became behind the addiction for a lot of people are the same. Shame, feelings of loss, hopelessness. So, it's not isolated to any one segment of the population. People used to think back in the day, and I used to talk about this a lot. Oh, no, this is like a problem for the inner cities.
Right.
It's a problem for the inner cities for people that don't have any money. No, the truth of the matter is that there's more substance use disorder in more affluent communities because people have money for substances.
Right.
And, in small towns, there's not a lot of stuff to do. People are bored, they're looking to get outside of themselves. So that's something that I think is important that people, the general public, know. The other part of it too is that, addiction isn't a moral issue. I think that a lot of people think, the people that use substances, they're weak or they're bad. They're criminals or, that could never be me. And the truth of the matter is that it can become anybody. We saw between, 2009 and like 2015, the amount of people that actually became addicted to opiates because of doctors, because of the prescription of opiate-based painkillers, right? OxyContin, we have down here Roxasets, which are the 30 milligram Percocets. That became like a big thing that people were using down here. And then when the pills dried up, because we had a whole sweep down in South Florida anyway, where there was all these doctors that were prescribing so much opiates. It was everywhere. When that all dried up, when people couldn't get well, they switched to heroin. So and it's important. It can happen to anybody. You go in for a back injury and they start prescribing you painkillers. Developing a tolerance to a substance has nothing to do with willpower. It has nothing to do with your moral compass. It has to do with physiology. If you take substances over a long period of time, your brain is going to need more of that substance to get the desired effect. If the desired effect is, I don't want to feel pain, a 5 milligram Percocet today is not going to do the same thing it's going to do for me 4 months from now. It's not going to work anymore. I'm going to have no choice but to go up. And that's the development of the physiological addiction.
That's good.
Now, I have a question about that because I'm a recovering alcoholic. And my biggest thing is I feel like alcoholism is normally put to the back burner, even though I think it affects way more people than the hard drugs. Because I think people kind of turn away from alcoholism, like, oh, it's okay to drink and partake. I feel like there's not enough push forward to how much alcohol is actually tearing apart communities. Is that something that you think that there needs to be more attention to, or do we just need to stick to fentanyl and crack and methamphetamines?
No, 100%. And, it's interestingly enough, one of the largest growing segments of the population that we see that's struggling with addiction and alcoholism is people 35 and up. We're seeing a lot of older people. We're actually seeing a lot of new, retirees in particular in areas where there is a lot of retirees really struggling with alcoholism for all the reasons that you would think, change in purpose, loss of certain responsibilities, not able to take care of children the same way, and all these kinds of things. And you're seeing a lot of people in their mid-50s and 60s entering treatment for the first time for alcoholism, and the amount of damage that it does. I believe there needs to be a lot of focus on it. Previous to coming over to Sunview, I was running a first responders program for 3.5-4 years. And the majority of the people that I was working with were alcoholics. And we're talking about police officers, firefighters, paramedics, military people, and their primary substance of choice was alcohol. The issue is that the use of alcohol is normalized in our culture, kind of similar to what Cami was talking about, back home in Guyana, right? It's a normalized thing. So, somebody drinking a beer at 11 o'clock in the morning, on a Saturday, we're having a mimosa out to brunch, early in the morning, nobody even looks at it weird because we're also used to seeing it. But if somebody's, high on heroin and nodding out, people are like, what are you doing? So I think it's gotten so, it looks very normalized that people don't say things to their loved ones until people are way into their, alcoholism, and so it's really starting to cause problems. I think a lot of alcoholics feel like they're, functioning alcoholics because they're able to get up and go to work all the time, until the very end and things like that. From my perspective, if one of the primary differences between, alcoholism and drug abuse is that alcohol is cheap, right? Alcohol is cheap. Drugs are expensive. So, to use heroin or to go smoke crack or to go use cocaine and I really develop a pretty strong habit, it's going to cost me a lot of money, which might contribute to what? That might contribute to me having to go steal or do things that, commit crimes, Alcohol is cheap. If I want to go get twisted, I can go into the liquor store and go buy, a bottle of, bottom shelf whiskey or something like that, or, pop off vodka or, something that's really cheap and be rocked all day and not have to do some of the things that somebody that's maybe addicted to cocaine or addicted to heroin might have to do. So because of that, it doesn't always get the amount of attention that it deserves, but alcohol kills more people.
I was just going to ask
people than all the other drugs combined.
Well, that's what I was just about to ask you. I said, because as far as I know, alcohol has the leading fatalities over everything else.
Absolutely. Alcohol and cigarettes kill more people than any of the illicit substances.
Yet it's legal.
Right. Right. So do you ever feel like it's kind of like like there's the kid there's a hole in the dam and you're trying to put your finger in it. Like, do you ever feel like overwhelmed by it because this is such a huge issue, right? And realistically, is the government really going to do something to stop it? So do you feel overwhelmed at times?
Absolutely. Listen, and I'm sure you probably felt that way at various points too, and that was your, one of the primary, areas that you worked in addiction for quite some time.
Mm.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you're fighting an uphill battle sometimes. With we're working in this field, but one of the things I take a look at, and I think that everybody that's worked in this industry for a period of time, when you have those success stories, I got a text message the other day from a guy that I had worked with, and he goes, hey Frank, I just wanted to let you know I love you. 14 years sober today.
Oh, wow.
And then
Wow.
those are the things
Wow.
that
That's good.
all right, this is why I'm doing this. So when you see that light bulb really kind of flash on, where somebody starts to really kind of connect the dots, about why they're doing what they're doing, what's really the intention behind their behavior, where is it coming from? When you start seeing those things and they're able to kind of communicate that to you, that makes it all worth it. Listen, this is the truth. Historically, addiction treatment has been a failing industry.
Mm.
Studies show that 40 to 60% of people relapse within the first 90 days of coming out of inpatient treatment.
Mm.
And, I think a lot of that has to do with the idea that a lot of people are willing to do inpatient treatment because they need to go get detox, but they're not willing to go to like extended care, like an outpatient program like this after they're done. So I think that contributes a lot to those statistics, because probably only 20% of people that go to rehab actually step into, outpatient levels of care and continue in groups.
20%?
Tops. Most people don't.
God.
They're like, I'm willing to go get detox, to go do inpatient treatment. Then I got to go back to work. I'm not going to go do extended care. Let alone am I going to go to AA, and go to community based. People that don't do extended care after they go to inpatient treatment don't stay sober.
Wow.
Being quite honest with you,
wow.
people that don't go to community-based support groups, in my experience, okay, people that don't do some kind of community-based support. I'm not, whether it's AA, NA, get super involved in church, go to see an outpatient therapist on a very regular basis. Those people don't stay sober either, because
so community. Okay.
Community is a big thing. The opposite of addiction is connection.
That's good. The opposite of addiction is connection. Wow, that's good.
Yeah, people need people. This is something that people can't do by themselves, and why that's difficult is, because that takes putting down some pride. It's not easy to turn around and say, hey, you know what? Step one in the 12 steps, their life has become unmanageable. It's not easy for people to really say that. You might be able to say it out loud, but to actually internalize what that means. And to really accept that is not an easy thing for people to do. So, what do you mean this substance has got control over me? What do you mean I can't manage my life?
So that's a very interesting. I've never heard that statistic before. You said less than 20%. So I think it's almost like I'm hearing you say that people need to be connected to other people in order to survive all the madness in this world, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Well, the right people too.
Well, right.
Right. And that goes back to like what we were talking about earlier, the environment, right? Because I could just speak for myself. My environments that I used to be in, well, I'm still in those environments now, but we're loaded with substance abuses. So when I go into those environments now, as an outsider looking, it's like, if you don't partake in what we partake in, then you're now the outsider. Like you're not part of this community anymore.
That's right.
And it becomes very, I think, hard for people who are trying to break away from certain things because they get sucked right back in.
Sure. One of the things that we take a look at all the time, and I have to talk to my clients about it all the time, it's, people are very excited a lot of times when they make that decision for themselves to get sober. But what starts to happen is that when it starts to normalize and you start to do better and you're doing well, and maybe you've gone back to work and all those kinds of things, being quite honest, and it sounds, simplistic, but, people start to get bored, or they start to feel deprived, especially if the majority of your social network is people that, maybe you were drinking with or smoking weed with or whatever it might be. And now all of a sudden I'm isolated. So, and I really don't have somebody to, I don't have the people to go socialize with, because it can't just be all about work. It can't just be all about, just the family. We need to be able to have, good experiences and fun too. Just because we make a decision to get sober doesn't mean that we shouldn't enjoy our life anymore. Actually, we get sober so I can enjoy my life.
Right.
If I take a look at sobriety as well, I'm just removing things. I'm just taking things away. Eventually, that won't last. I'll say, this is okay, but the addiction will stay up on a pedestal. Now, if I develop a mission, a passion, a sense of purpose, I'm enjoying my life, good things are happening for me. I get up in the morning and today, might not be the greatest day, but it's definitely better than when I was at the end of my addiction. People can navigate that stuff when people have things to look forward to, people to socialize with, and all those kinds of things. And that's why community-based supports for people are so important, because again, for people that have been using, substances for a long time, it really, it's a relationship. They have to grieve that. They're walking away from what was their best friend or their girl. It's almost like their best friend or their girlfriend or their husband or whatever it might be. You can't just remove that and not replace it with something positive.
That's good. That's good. I did, last question for me. I did want you to talk a little bit about what the effect addiction has on the family, right? Right, because obviously you're seeing the client. One thing I always caution people against is this: not because you had a revelation means your whole family is ready to jump on board with it. Okay, and that's what people think. Like, hey,
of course,
right?
Listen,
if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a big thing. Addiction is a disease of the family, and from a very, very simplistic standpoint, yes, a lot of times, the nuclear family or maybe the extended family will want, the identified client to get better. But when that person gets better, they stop using, not only does the substance use change, very often people's personalities change, their interests change and things like that. And maybe their role in the household might change. So sometimes what we see is, unfortunately, is you actually might see some resistance to that. Well, what do you mean you want to help me co-parent now? You never really cared about co-parenting before. What do you mean you want to get involved in coming to parent-teachers conferences? You didn't want to do that before, or you left all the bills to me. What do you mean you want to see, the checkbook now, whatever, So addiction impacts every single person that the addict or alcoholic deals with on a regular basis. And we get sick in a family and we have to heal in a family. So, my belief is that, family units that really want to start functioning well and they're trying to, adjust to, this new way of being with this person in our life that was struggling for a long time, if they can, getting involved in in family therapy is very, very important, because the whole homeostasis or that whole balance of the family starts to change. Now, what we see also sometimes is, the client says, hey, I'm doing better and I want us to change our life. Like, hey, wife or husband, like, I identify that you're drinking too much. Just because we make the decision to change doesn't mean that everybody else around us wants to change. Just because we want to do better doesn't mean everybody else is ready to do better. And a big part of my job and the therapists that work with me here is like teaching clients how to navigate that. Because it's very, very difficult. Well, it's their fault because they won't change or they're not willing to jump on board. I get it, and that hurts. But you're only responsible for what you do. You can't control other people's behavior. So, and that's a big thing that we have to work with our clients and we teach them is like, hey, we can only have ownership of what's ours. We can't own other people's behaviors.
Yeah, that's important. Al, you had any other questions?
Yeah, I got two questions. One is serious, one is lighthearted. My one serious question is, well, then, is there something that you can teach people who are dealing with an addict, maybe how they can maneuver around that person to make them not feel like they're so isolated, and then you push them right back into the same situation? Is this something that you guys discuss?
Absolutely. What we try to do with all the clients that come to Sunview is that, we try to establish, as well, as long as a client would try to release confidential information, we try to establish relationships with the family members from very early onset, because we identify that, they're a big part of the client's recovery. And we really do start to educate them about, how to be supportive, what healthy helping versus enabling looks like. What sort of things to start looking, they could look for changes in personality, not necessarily just about if somebody's relapsing, but hey, it's to be expected now that, that they got sober and they're like in post-acute withdrawal, they're only sober for 30 days, 35 days. Hey, they might be a little bit more irritable. They might be struggling with this or with that. This is normal. This isn't normal. Because they need direction. Hey, Frank, they might ask me like, hey, I really want to confront my husband or my wife on this. Do you think it's the right time to do it? So them having that outlet and having that support, one of the things that we always, advise our family members of our loved ones to do is, there's Al-Anon and Nar-Anon for family members, and you have Families Anonymous as well. And being quite honest, a lot of times, in particular spouses, they benefit from getting their own therapist because they've had their own experience of what living in the household with addiction and other dysfunction, that feels like for them, and having an outlet for them to go talk about, what they've experienced, to an objective party where they don't have to be afraid, like, hey, I really want to say something. I don't want to say it in front of my husband because I'm afraid I'm going to send him out. I'm afraid I'm going to send him to go use, but I need to get this out so I can process it. So we talk a lot about them getting their own therapist as well. It'd be very, very helpful for them.
Okay. All right.
And then my final question is, I see you have a Marvel poster in the background. Do you think that Doomsday is going to live up to the hype?
I would like to say yes. I wish I could show you my entire office. I would kind of flash it around all my Funko Pops and all this kind of stuff up all over the office. I actually collect comic books. It's like a big hobby. Yeah, it's a hobby of mine. It's something
I did see the comic book.
Love it. We go complete fantasy land, right? Which is awesome because of what we do for a living is so heavy all the time. I hope that it does. I really hope that it does. Do I think that it will? Probably not.
I feel the same way.
So Frank, you have a wealth of knowledge, man. Ever since I've known you, I've always said, Frank, man, you know so much about this. So if people wanted to contact you in terms of speaking engagements, or they had questions about substance abuse, or getting help for people, like, how would they contact you?
Probably the quickest way to get me, if you're just looking for like advice or speaking kind of stuff, would be my email address. Okay. It's FGALIMIDI at Sunview, SUNVIEW, Wellness, WELLNESS.com.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I just think like you have so much information to share, man, and can't keep that all to yourself, man. Right?
No, I appreciate it. Listen, it's a privilege and an honor to be able to, do this. A big thing for me now at this point in my career is, I really kind of want to get the message out there outside of just the treatment community. People need to understand what's going on. People also need to understand that there's help out there, and that substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment is not just for the wealthy people. It's not just for people that have Cadillac insurance policies or, a lot of cash. There are resources out there for people that don't have a lot of money. We actually take Medicaid here. Which is a blessing because I'm able to treat so many people that I wouldn't be able to otherwise, and in-network insurance and things like that in a very, very low self-pay rate, because we realize that everybody needs help. Getting help is not just a rich person's thing.
Good, right. That's good, man. Well, Frank, listen, man, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and we wish you all the best, and in the work that you're doing, and just keep up the good work, man.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you, guys.
All right. You have a good one.
Good one.
If I ever took a loss, I learned a lesson. I won't ever think I'm better than the next man. I've been down before to come up, I ain't stressing. Baby, I'm too busy counting.